Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Craig Turner with World Trade Center Buffalo Niagara. I appreciate you being here for our first event of the year, and it's a good one. We're excited to bring you an update on CUSMA and USMCA. It's been a while since we've done some programming on this. For a little while there, it seemed like we were doing something every other week. But we're very pleased actually just to see among our attendees today a lot of people from both sides of the border, which is excellent, was kind of the whole point of the agreement in the first place. Our presentation today is done in partnership with the Canada's Trade Commissioner Service and the Canadian Consulate General in New York. We're very excited to work with them. We're excited to have Damon Piatek, who is, as many of you know, is our new board chair for World Trade Center Buffalo Niagara, but today he's going to have his other hat on, which is international trade expert and president of Welke Customs Brokers USA, based here in Tonawanda, New York. Thank you to our sponsors today, Canada's Trade Commissioner Service and Welke Customs Brokers. I want to give a special thanks to Sophie and the team at the Niagara Industrial Agency or Niagara Industrial Association for helping us get the word out. I think a big part of our Canadian attendance today is due to their efforts in putting the word out. So we appreciate them, and I know Don's here, and he'll talk a little bit later. The Consulate General in New York approached us in the fall of 2021 and suggested that now would be a good time to gather everybody around again, around the trade agreement. Talk about how things have been going, because in many ways things have been going very well. And now with lessons learned and companies using the agreement, look at providing some clarity on how companies now can be I think as the presentation started, how companies now can be utilizing it to further their growth plans. Still supply chain challenges, a lot of things going on, but in the middle of all of this is this agreement that's very well put together, we all believe, and is a real opportunity here. So that's where Damon's going to walk us through a lot of those things. Before we get to Damon, though, I want to just introduce Nigel Neale, who's the Senior Trade Commissioner for Canada, and he's just going to give a couple welcoming comments. And Nigel, again, thank you for your partnership here, and we love doing these programs together with you.
Okay, with that, excuse me, very warm welcome. Thank you, Craig. Bonjour tout le monde, merci. This is great to be here. Craig, you and your team, you're true friends and supporters of Canada in this critically important Buffalo Niagara region. So I'm thrilled to be here with you virtually, and I sincerely hope that the next time we are able to get together, it's in person soon. And I think we're almost there. I am speaking to you from Manhattan, where the Canadian Consulate General is located. We're on the ancestral lands of the Lenape peoples who have stewarded this land for generations. And I offer this land acknowledgement to affirm our commitment to a spirit of reconciliation, mutual respect, and collaboration. Our work here at the Consulate General is premised on great and strong collaboration, and I'm pleased to be here, not only with yourself, Craig, but certainly with Damon Piatek of Welke Customs Brokers USA and Dr. Don Sear from the Niagara Industrial Association and also Brock University. I do want to call out my colleague in the region, Trade Commissioner Linda Soltis, who's a key resource for Canadian and US businesses with trade, export, and border questions. Linda has a really important Canadian business client acquisition role, and she can certainly support you in your efforts to export and learn more about the Buffalo region. So as we all know, the border is absolutely critical to our two countries, and the pandemic has only reinforced this interdependence. Canada has no closer friend, partner, and ally than the US. Our close ties exist between our people, and this is at the heart of our extraordinary relationship, a partnership of neighbors, shared geography, similar values, common interests, deep people-to-people connections, and very complex and intertwined economic and security ties. Now, a couple of weeks ago, when I was putting some thought into what I wanted to share with you today, clearly the importance of our bilateral economic relationship and our integrated supply chains were at the top of the list. Little did I know that in the weeks that followed would bring proof to the crucial nature of these supply chains. And I do want to take a few minutes to address the elephant in the room, the illegal occupations across Canada and the blocking of the critical flow of goods and people across our shared border, which thankfully is largely over. Some members of these protests, and protests of course are legitimate in our societies, but some members displayed symbols of hate, anti-Semitism, bigotry, racism. They desecrated statues and monuments, and they spread misinformation. I want to be very clear on this, that these actions have absolutely no place in Canadian society and go deeply against our Canadian values. These blockades, as you know, resulted in very real economic instability, not only for Canadian and American border towns, but for all Canadians and Americans, as our supply chain was impacted and our economy suffered. The impact of these illegal blockades went well beyond our borders. Why is this important? Well, we need to ensure that the flow of nearly $2 billion worth of goods and services that cross our border safely and securely every day, that amounts to over $600 billion in goods traded annually. This is important. We make things together. Roughly 60% of US imports from Canada are intermediate goods that feed American manufacturing, that go into US made products and fuel millions of US jobs. You can think of autos and agriculture. So even when the pandemic forced the rest of the world to shut down, our countries worked in lockstep to ensure the continued flow of these goods and services, and this was a real testament to the strength of our relationship. From life-saving goods such as food and medical supplies, to the movement of our critical truck drivers, healthcare and critical infrastructure workers, the border really was a constant conduit for essential goods and services. So if there's one thing that, in just over 2 years of this pandemic has taught us, we cannot go it alone. The path forward towards economic recovery for all is one that we must forge together. So I want to shift tracks a little bit to talk about why we're here today, to learn more about where we are with CUSMA or USMCA. This was a major accomplishment when what we call the gold standard of our FTAs, USMCA, entered into force after largely virtual negotiations on July 1st, 2020. Canada, the US, and Mexico represent almost 500 million consumers with a combined GDP of almost $25 trillion. That's over a quarter of global GDP. This is a region that matters. USMCA is all about maintaining, sustaining, and growing our North American supply chains. This modern agreement has provisions, especially for small businesses that are at the heart of our economy and whose success is key to a strong economic recovery. It levels the playing field and preserves market access, and I really encourage you, and you will learn about that more today, to use it to your benefit. While we are here certainly to talk about the benefits of USMCA, I do need to raise a challenge that is counter to it. While we, Canada, certainly understand the need to invest in infrastructure, we were very disappointed to see the domestic content requirements in the form of Buy American included in the infrastructure bill passed by Congress late last year. And let me tell you why. I want to be clear, we absolutely share the goal of stimulating jobs and supporting workers, but applying something like Buy American restrictions against Canadian inputs, and remember I mentioned over 60% go into US goods, will in fact have the opposite effect by negatively impacting US jobs and US companies that rely on these cross-border supply chains. We saw it again when Congress was considering the Build Back Better Act, which would have created a tax credit for US manufactured electric vehicles. This would have constituted a violation of the US obligations under USMCA, but also flew in the face of the heavily integrated nature of our automotive sector, very much intertwined. A car travels across the border up to 7 times. So when we say we have a Canadian-made car, it actually includes at least 50% US-made parts. So when access to the US market is blocked for Canadian companies, this is a challenge. All we want and are asking for is fairness and reciprocity in our trade agreements. So in conclusion, no matter the challenges, and there have many and there will be others, as you have seen, we have an extremely strong foundation to our relationship, one that allows us to chart a joint path forward for the recovery and prosperity of our citizens. So moving on to USMCA, this is a blockbuster trade agreement. It's designed to help companies like yours expand your exports. So with that, thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, and I'll turn it back over to Craig. Thanks.
Thanks, Nigel. Well stated. A lot of us on this call have been working together for many years at trying to emphasize the importance of the U.S.-Canada trade relationship. And I'll speak from my own experience, we've learned that the further that you get away from the border, the less people are talking about it, and the more things like what you just described in the Build Back Better plan surface. And we constantly are weighing in on these things and saying, no, you need to consider. We see it every day here in our region. You talked about at the beginning about doing hopefully the next meetings in person. Interestingly enough, my Facebook memories this morning were a presentation that Damon actually did with one of the chambers of commerce on doing business in the U.S. for Canadian companies. And when the thing popped up on my feed this morning, the first thing I thought was, remember crossing the border? But then the second thing that I remembered was, remember wearing ties? Does everybody remember wearing ties? So it was just very, very interesting. But that aside, let me get to Damon quickly here so we can get to the presentation. If you could just go back one real fast, sorry. Just wanted to give the run of show for today. So we're going to introduce Damon in a moment. He will give his presentation. Then following the presentation, we're going to open up the floor for Q&A. Feel free while the presentation is going on, if something hits you at that time, go ahead, type it in the chat and we'll get to it at the end. But at the end, Don Sear, who's the chair for the Niagara Industrial Association. Don, thank you for being here today and for your partnership here. Is going to lead us in a Q&A. We're going to try and get everybody done by 11, like we said, but we'll see how we do. So with that, let me introduce Damon. So Damon Piatek is President and CEO of Welke Customs Brokers USA. He's a licensed U.S. customs broker, certified customs specialist, and has more than 20 years of experience in the import-export, customs, transportation, and logistics sectors. Damon speaks all over the country on various supply chain industry topics. As I mentioned, he is the new chairman of our board at World Trade Center Buffalo Niagara. He's also a board member with the Buffalo Niagara International Trade Gateway Organization. He's an active member with the Greater Akron Chamber of Commerce, the Niagara USA Chamber of Commerce, Pittsburgh Airport Area, Charleston, and Tampa Chambers of Commerce. You'll notice he belongs to organizations near ports. He's also an active member of the National Association of Customs Brokers and Freight Forwarders and the Northern Border Brokers Association. Damon's a great resource. We're fortunate to have him involved with us with World Trade Center Buffalo Niagara, and that he can fire off what I think is one of the best USMCA CUSMA presentations I've heard. So Damon, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, and just let us know when you need the slides moved.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Hopefully I can live up to it. And again, if there's any questions, type them in, we'll get to them. And I can even kind of direct and fill in a little bit more information on it. Thank you again, Nigel. That was a great introduction to USMCA, and what it really is a replacement of NAFTA. So NAFTA had been 25 years old when it was replaced in July of 2020. Billions and billions in trade was brought back to North America under NAFTA, but it did get old, and a lot of what was needed was updates to just travel. So what we have to remember is these trade agreements are more than just goods. There's a immigration policy, travel policy that goes along with it too. So just kind of some of the highlights here, what USMCA has brought to the table that was much better than NAFTA. was there's a lot of intellectual property right protection for the countries involved, leveling the playing field there and making sure that, because we're dealing with 3 separate countries, there is differences in those regulations in intellectual property rights and protections. So that was brought to the table under USMCA. Nigel did mention the small business. There's actually a whole chapter in USMCA, CUSMA, dedicated to small to medium-sized businesses and making sure that they have an advantage under this new agreement versus NAFTA. There's also a de minimis agreement that was changed. So for de minimis, that's just going to be a low dollar value shipment that's not going to have taxes or duties applied to it. The specifics on that are with Canada, it's, I believe, less than $40 or $40 or more is going to have tax to it. But oh no, I'm sorry, that's Mexico. The de minimis, de minimis was moved up from 40 to 150 Canadian. And then from the US, it was moved up from 250 to 800. So we have a section 321 here in the US. Take advantage of that, and no duties or taxes. And you don't have to sign a agreement if you're shipping, you don't have to sign a USMCA CUSMA certificate if you have those de minimis values. So you just don't have to worry about the agreement at all. So we did talk about the automotive. That's one of the industries that was most affected by this, if you look at the slide. And what happened there is we changed the requirements from 62.5% regional value content. So that's content from Canada, Mexico, and the United States. And that is now up to 75%. So a lot of this is rolling in. Another thing that is in USMCA CUSMA versus NAFTA for the automotive industry is the minimum wage requirement of $16 US. So just recently, you may have seen in the news that the auto workers in Mexico for GM have signed and ratified a union. So that's something new to protect their rights. You could read more about that. There's a lot that's going on in Mexico as far as labor requirements and increasing labor standards to what we're used to in Canada and the United States. Digital content, there's a whole additional chapter to talk about digital content and digital trade. Again, NAFTA being 25 years old, a lot of the occupations that exist now didn't exist back then, so that update was definitely needed. And again, we talked a little bit about labor, a little bit about that. But one of the major differences that I did want to talk about was the sunset clause of the agreement is 16 years. So after 16 years, we're going to look at this agreement and it may be changed, updated, but it still has to be ratified by all 3 parties at that 16-year mark with that sunset clause. So it's not indefinite or just continue to go and go. There was no sunset clause in NAFTA. Really needed that update. So go ahead to the next screen there, Ashika. Great. So one of the things is provisions for disputes and settlements. And we saw that recently, if you saw what was going on with the dairy access for US farmers into the Canadian market. Schumer made an announcement recently about that, that, there was some unfair practices going on between the countries. So that was settled under these new dispute settlement regulations. And this agreement really does open up that access for agriculture back and forth too. Canada and the US have a lot of restrictions on different agricultural products. So it's hard to get dairy into the United States. It's hard to get dairy into Canada. So we're opening up that flow of the dairy market and different agricultural products along with USMCA. So this is a good time to take a look, say, hey, if I'm in that agricultural field, how does NAFTA, or not NAFTA, how does USMCA open up that market to me, whether you're a Canadian farmer or a US farmer? Again, the small business portion of it We really want to look at if you're an SME and you haven't looked at the agreement to see what the benefits are, this is a time to really kind of take a deep dive into this, talk to an expert and see how you can open up a whole new market. Like Nigel had mentioned, we're our best trading partners here in North America. And what we have learned from the pandemic is that we could build stability into the supply chain by moving our sources closer and really taking an advantage of this. And there are a lot of products that previously were not eligible for NAFTA, or the way products are eligible has changed. So the basis of how that works, which I'm going to get into in a little bit here, how to apply your product for the new agreement, USMCA, CUSMA versus NAFTA, really didn't change much. But some of the percentages, like we saw in the automotive, some of the quotas have been lifted. So you really have to take a look at your specific product. The other thing is we talked about now, if any of the three countries enter into a bilateral trade agreement with China, the other countries have the ability to eliminate the USMCA agreement and move out of it. So there's some protection in there for onshoring. And then there's currency manipulation. None of the countries that are involved with CUSMA, USMCA are allowed to do any currency manipulation, because we have seen that with China. And it is a problem in international trade with currency manipulation. So why don't you go to the next one there, and we'll get right into how to qualify your goods for USMCA/CUSMA. One of the things with trade and compliance that I'm really trying to drive home lately with the education is it's a question and a mentality that you have to have. And you have to ask the question, how do I? Not why can't I? You know, we have such a great relationship with Canada, and I think sometimes US companies, Canadian companies, forget that you're dealing with a separate country, separate laws, separate regulations. And that's what helps level the playing field and open up trade between the two countries. Now, there's still things like softwood lumber that have restrictions on it coming from Canada. So you want to be very careful not to just think, hey, I'm sending something to the US, it's free. We still have to look at these regulations. And at the heart of compliance with international trade is tariff numbers. So you really want to make sure that your product is classified properly. And because part of this rules of origin on these certificates is potential for a tariff shift. So the way you can apply for this agreement is regional value content, but that's going to be specified by the product. So you have to look up your tariff number in the agreement and see how you can apply for the treatment under the free trade. So it's tariff shift. So going from one chapter to another, and there's exclusions in that, so you have to be very careful. The second way is a substantial transformation with that tariff shift and regional value content, or just regional value content of a certain percentage. So you have to look at, so it's either going to be regional value content, tariff shift, or a combination of both. Those are the three ways to apply for this trade agreement. And you have to look up your tariff number of the end product and look at how the tariff, how the trade agreement prescribes how you can apply for that tariff. You have to keep documentation. So if it's a tariff shift, you have to show the documentation of, this is the products that we have in Canada, this is our manufacturing process, and this is what the end product is. If it's regional value content, you're going to need to get very specific with all the percentages of the product, all the costs. You're really going to have a material list sheet that has the cost of importation, what the countries of origin are. And then, because if you import this into the US, or you import it into Canada, or you import it into Mexico, those countries can request to do an investigation into the validity of your certification. You will have to produce these documents, and you have timeframes that you have to produce the documents in to substantiate your claim. So if you're ordering from somebody, you have to do your due diligence to make sure that the supplier is not only filling out the certificate properly, but that they're doing their due diligence to document that their product actually qualifies for the agreement. Now we have certificate of origin on here. So this is very interesting change from NAFTA to USMCA, which there is no prescribed form anymore. So if you remember, we've been doing trade for a long time. I've been in this for a long time, and we've always had a NAFTA certificate, which was CBP form XYZ. You had to fill out that form. It had to be in that format, and you had to submit it to CBP when you were doing imports into the United States. Canada had the prescribed form, and they had it for CBSA in Canada, and Mexico had it for customs down in Mexico. Same sheet, a little bit different, but it followed the rules of the NAFTA agreement. Now, there is no specific sheet. We have one that we've created that has all the data requirements, data points that's required, which I can make available through the World Trade Center, if that makes it easier. But the data points that you need on your certificate are very specific. So you have to have the information about the certifier, the exporter, the producer, and the importer of the goods. You have to have the 6-digit harmonized tariff code on it. And that's, you know, the way that the tariff number works is it's a 10-digit code. The first 6 are internationally accepted. The last 4 are statistical reporting values for the different countries. So the 10-digit tariff number is not going to be the same for Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So that first 6 digits is very important, and that's all you need to have on the form, and that's all you should be putting on the form is the first 6 digits. And then the origin criteria under which the goods qualify. So that's back to what we talked about. Is it a tariff shift? Is it regional value content? Or is it a combination of both? And then you have to also understand, you know, wholly obtained and produced. So agricultural products that are grown in the country are wholly obtained and produced. If you're digging for iron ore or some kind of mineral, then that's going to be wholly produced in that country. So that's, you also have to have the blanket period or by shipment. So if you're doing a blanket period, it's a 1-year period. If it's a shipment by shipment, you would not have a blanket period on there. And then authorization, signature of who's certifying it. Now, mistakes that I've seen in the past with NAFTA is the receptionist signs the NAFTA agreement. That's really not what you want. You want to have somebody who has knowledge of the requirements and has done the due diligence to understand how it qualifies for USMCA, not the receptionist or the customer service person. So if you want to go to the next screen. I just wanted to take a look at the difference of trade through the change from NAFTA to USMCA, but we also had the pandemic there. So if you look at this, this is just the trade that happened from 2019, 2020, when the agreement came into effect, in 2021. NAFTA was very good at increasing the volume of trade in North America. USMCA will do the same, and we'll continue to see this increase. So the orange line there you can see is that middle year. That's the pandemic year gone way down. But if you look at just the blue line, which is 2019, and the gray line, which is 2021, you could see as we get out of the pandemic and get more into a normal economy, you could see that towards the end of the year, that October, November, and December, in 2021, trade has increased tremendously over that 2019 period. Same period in 2019, which is pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. And again, one of the things that we've learned from the pandemic is to make sure we can build stability in our supply chain. Part of building stability in the supply chain is trading with closer partners, Canada, US, and Mexico. Let's go ahead to the next screen. Oh, yeah, there we go. So that's now this is the trade between US and Mexico. You can see very similar lines. And then we'll skip right to the last one, which is combination of trade in North America for those 3 years, 2019, 2020, and 2021. So go ahead and flip that, Ashika. There we go. So again, you could see that last quarter there, the last quarter, October, November, December of 2019 versus the last quarter of 2021, October, November, December, you could see that trade has increased. And that's because of this agreement. It's opening up that flow of trade. It's onshoring of vendors and really making sure you have predictability into your supply chain. So go ahead to the next step. There's next screen there. We're going to talk about compliance. And I mentioned due diligence before. And in this industry, we talk about due diligence, and it's a little bit of a gray area. It's what's reasonably thought or what's reasonably done for somebody in that position. So it's a gray area. It's a definition that really isn't well defined by U.S. Customs, but you have to understand the risks. You know, I've seen companies under NAFTA. A great example of that is a steel company in Canada was creating steel wire. So they were drawing the wire from rod and galvanizing it and then sending it down to the United States. The only reason why that wire qualified for NAFTA is because the rod that they were manufacturing into wire came from a mill in Canada. They decided to change where they sourced their mill, and they sourced it in Moldova. So instead of getting the steel from Canada, they got the steel from Moldova. Well, that totally eliminated the ability to apply for NAFTA, and US Customs did an investigation. That was a small company. They ended up with a $425,000 penalty because of NAFTA violations. And it was, when you have a violation with US Customs, you're going to have negligence, gross negligence, and fraud. Those are your choices. I don't know isn't an option. But understanding the risks, so you really have to take better advantage of this. What we could learn from that little scenario is understand what the regulations are for your product and use them to your advantage. So if it's a tariff shift that you have to go through, get your sources from the best sources for your products, document that tariff shift, and then apply the trade agreement. So think of trade before you think of the manufacturing process, before you think of your materials list. If you bring that further ahead in the process, you're going to be much further along when you're finally selling your product. And think about where the end source is for your product. Where are you going to sell it? And then that'll bring you back to the beginning. Compliance is something that's connected from import to export. There's no division there. You know, import compliance, export compliance, it's all connected. You want to build a strong relationship with your suppliers to make sure that they're doing their due diligence and they're compliant. So they're not sending you a NAFTA certificate, or I'm sorry, they're not sending you a USMCA certificate that they haven't done their due diligence on. It's really understanding and knowing your supply chain much better. Maintain the records and supporting documents. We talked about that a little bit earlier. So if you're understanding how you apply for USMCA or CUSMA, and then keeping the documentation. Now, I do get pushback from a lot of clients that say, oh, I can't do that. That's not something we do. If you're going to apply for the trade agreement, it's something you have to do. And you have to work it into your process. You have to work it into your company and your procedures. So if you're going to apply for a trade agreement, if you're going to engage in international trade, understand what the regulations are first, and then build your processes around what the regulations are. There's great information online on CBSA and CBP for additional requirements for USMCA. The US government lately, the Canadian government, they're doing a fantastic job of information and education to the trade. And then, consult with a professional before you get into this. Make sure you're consulting with the right people. I see a lot of companies that are quote unquote international trade consultants. Look into their background, make sure they understand what they're doing, work with a professional, not just somebody who's a trade professional. Make sure they're a licensed customs broker, a trade attorney. Those are going to be your best resources to make sure that you're following the regulations correctly. And lastly, obtain a binding ruling. You could do it in Canada, you could do it in the US, you could do it in Mexico. Go to the government and ask them very inexpensively to say, hey, does my product actually qualify? It's a know before you go type of mentality that's going to help you take advantage of this trade agreement, and you're going to be able to use it to your advantage. And so on the record keeping, make sure the supporting documentation is 5 years. So anything that happens, US Customs, Canada Customs, they have the ability to go back 5 years for fines and penalties. So it's not just once. It's not like a speeding ticket. You go speeding down the same street every day to work. They only give you a fine for one time. Customs and border protection in the US here, they're going to go back 5 years and give you a speeding ticket for every day that you spent. I've been through investigations with US Customs. I've been through investigation with Mexico Customs and involved in that and pulling documentation and helping customers. You're never in a good position if you don't have the supporting documentation before you sign the agreement. Definitely understand where you're at before you sign the agreement, before you engage in international trade. And I believe we're on the question and answer now.
Well, thank you, Damon. Appreciate it. Thanks for walking us through. I want to, Don, if you want to show up on the screen there, we're going to turn it over to Don to lead us through the Q&A. And Don, thanks again to Niagara Industrial Association for your partnership and working with us on this. I'll let you maybe tee up the Q&A a little bit. I have a question, but I'll let you kind of go first.
Sure. Well, thank you, Craig. Thanks to the World Trade Center for inviting us to be part of this. This is a great and timely webinar. Nigel, I very much appreciated your words of the important integration between our two countries in terms of trade. Oddly enough, as you noted, brought to the attention by the Freedom Convoy of just how much is involved in trade. I teach international finance at the graduate and undergraduate level, and I can tell you that as well, this, aside from COVID, for investment managers right now, one of the top risks is geopolitical risk. And of course, we've seen that I won't get into, we have an issue arising in Europe. We've had issues arising in terms of Southeast Asia and Asia. And you're seeing this, aside from COVID, you're seeing the reshoring and investment back into manufacturing in all three countries. The integration of trade, because it's increasingly becoming the safest place to be. And I noted, Damon, in some of your discussion, some elements of that. So I'll open it up here. Just as quickly, the Niagara Industrial Association, for those that are not familiar with it, 260 members, small, medium manufacturers in the Niagara region, and associate members, suppliers, and we look at fostering our connections and lobbying on behalf of manufacturing. And interestingly enough, we have a board meeting tomorrow, our first two joint board meetings between the Niagara Industrial Association and the Buffalo Niagara Manufacturing Alliance, a similar association, similar size, and we look at having some joint events and collaboration in the hopes of fostering trade. So without further ado, I'll open it up for questions, and bear with me because I'm much more adept at Microsoft Teams, but I will look for hands to be raised in your, of course, in your reactions menu that you have. And we'll open it up for, Craig, please go ahead.
Well, I'll start. Thanks, Don. Thanks again for helping us with this. And I before I ask the question, I just wanted to point out in the chat box, Damon mentioned the that there is no official USMCA certificate of origin form. I dropped our file in there that he mentioned that we've put one together through World Trade Center Buffalo Niagara. It's in the chat. You can download it. You can use it. We're happy if you do. We hope it's a good resource for you. My question is, it's going to sound like a huge softball question, but I assure you it's not. Damon does not know it's coming. I am thinking about so companies that are not currently using the trade agreement or have never used the trade agreement, and day one of wrapping your head around the opportunity that might be there, because you have to figure, presumably you're doing this because there's a growth opportunity, there's an onshoring opportunity, there's a lot of reasons to do this. I wake up in the morning and I think about it and I want to pursue it. Can you advise on the lift? Because I think one of the things in our world that stops companies from doing things are the perceived lift that they have to do to get to where they want to get to. So can you talk a little bit about, one, how you start, who you talk to, who in your organization are the key people that need to be a part of the conversation, and ballpark, how many hours do we need to put into this to even get the conversation started?
So when I look at a company who's never engaged in international trade before and they want to get into it, Canada, Mexico, Canada's the best place to look to get into international trade, whether you're sourcing material or selling to. If you haven't been in international trade for a long time, a lot of us that have been here, we hear about the Golden Horseshoe, which is that Southern Ontario, the US. This is a great trade area. And, I get involved with a lot of buy local too. But when you look at the definition of buy local, it's a 150-mile radius from where you are. If we draw a 150-mile radius around Buffalo, we're circling into Canada. That's buy local to me. That's 150 miles. We have this opportunity. There's no language barrier between US and Canada. There's a little bit of cultural differences, but that's, very easily overcome. But it's the best place to start. Now, where do you go for compliance? I spoke about licensed customs broker. If you're sending stuff to Canada, talk to a licensed Canadian customs broker. If you're sending stuff to the United States, talk to a US licensed customs broker. If they can't get you the information, then go to a trade attorney. Most customs brokers that are doing what they focus on are going to be able to give you that consulting advice. And it's going to be a little less expensive than going to a trade attorney. But those are the two places to start. It's not a really heavy lift. Again, you're not worrying about a huge currency difference. Canadian companies are used to dealing in US dollars if you're selling to Canadian companies. To do that with a bank locally, you have that currency exchange that you have to deal with, but you can get there easily. Hopefully soon we'll be traveling back and forth for lunch. I used to do that all the time. So, that'll open up. But really, it's understanding the trade agreement. Understanding international compliance is a big place to start. Is it going to be a ton of hours? Not really. And I'm going to put a little plug in there for World Trade Center with the GBA program. They have an excellent program to be able to understand international trade through that GBA program too. So that might be a good place to start. But really, you could have it wrapped up in a couple of months and really moving forward with a robust trade program. Talking to the Canadian consulate if you're a Canadian company, talking to the World Trade Center, commerce in the United States. They're going to help you export, they're going to help you import, they're going to help you understand it. And really within a couple of months, you can open up a whole new market that, as Nigel was saying, it's billions of dollars that's going back and forth across the border. Why not take advantage of it as a small to medium-sized company?
Thank you, Damon. Craig, did you have a follow-up at all?
No, I'm good, thanks. I'm trying to thinking about the the mystique of getting started on these things. And this is, USMCA and CUSMA is one piece of the puzzle. There's many different things in our world that companies could really advance their company, but just the idea of putting the resources into getting started is sometimes a holdback. And Damon mentioned our GBA and TAP programs, and they help get through that too. But no, Damon, I appreciate that.
Thank you. I'm going to turn, there's a question in the chat. It's from Linda Solstice. Damon, what's the most common mistake that you see companies make?
I think it's the due diligence part. It's the not understanding the agreement and falling into the trap that, hey, it's just sending something to Canada, or hey, it's just sending something to the United States, and not really making sure that their product qualifies for the agreement and understanding how it qualifies, and then documenting that qualification. Like I said, we gave the example of that steel company, you know, that's $425,000 to a small to medium-sized company. You know, if that was Ford or, you know, GM, they really don't care. Ford, I think at one point was fined $4.5 million for fraudulent NAFTA claims. You know, they have those pockets to be able to sustain those penalties. Don't get caught with your guard down. Do the due diligence, go through that process. It's not a heavy lift, but that's the biggest mistake. Hey, it's going to the US. I'm sending it from Canada and it's eligible for NAFTA. We have free trade. Free trade is a very strict set of regulations that you have to understand. And you can't just fill out an app, you know, hey, here, I fill out the form, it's eligible. But that's probably the biggest mistake I see.
Thank you. Commissioner Neale, you've got your hand raised.
Thank you, Don. So I'll just pick up on Damon's comment, and I couldn't agree more about the importance of preparation. And absolutely, you know, for our companies that are on the line, you know, you've got some service providers who can help you. Please make use of those services to be prepared to understand what the complexities are. I did want to, if it's helpful for everyone, just a reminder on the border and entering into Canada. As of 1 minute after midnight on February the 28th, the testing requirements are being relaxed. So an antigen test is acceptable. I wanted to confirm, I mean, because I know it's difficult to sort of get a clear line from one authoritative source on what the requirements are, but the antigen test taken within 24 hours is accepted, but an at-home test is not acceptable. It still needs to be produced by a health authority. So whether it's a mobile clinic, whether it's your primary care service, it needs to be authorized. You need to have documented proof of that. And then coming back into the US, of course, if you're driving, given that we're talking about this border region, I believe all you need to demonstrate is vaccination, fully vaccination, no testing requirement. So just to confirm that. Because we also realize that 2+ years of a closed border has been very difficult for business and this cross-border region. So we're getting there.
Nigel, I'll get you to put your hand down. I think I'm not seeing other questions. Damon, let me ask you a question. And I realize it's a difficult one because we have been in this period of COVID. Have you seen in your business any change in the nature of trade in terms of commodities? Is there any trend that you might be seeing? Agriculture picked up or?
Sure. Really what I've seen the trend is, you know, we have noticed that companies are really kind of taking a hard look at their supply chain. You know, one of the issues that we've had over the pandemic is supply chain issues. The cargo ship in the Suez, blocking the Suez Canal, shutdowns throughout the world due to COVID. You know, we've done a good job in North America with Canada and the US and Mexico, keeping the border open and letting those drivers access the country, you know, without restriction back and forth. What I've noticed is, you know, international trade is so complex. We have things in the US where we talk about 301 duties with China. There's the pandemic kind of overshadowed the trade war that we're in with China over intellectual property rights, currency manipulation. There's the trade war was overdue with China. We have 232 duties, which were implemented by the last administration. We all thought, hey, the new administration's coming in, the 301 duties are going to go away, the 232 duties are going to go away. That did not happen. What I see in the industry and in international trade is the US government needs money, hands down. Historically speaking, one of the largest sources of revenue for the US government has always been US customs. Those tariffs that we've applied on products from the beginning of our country, US customs tariffs have fueled the expansion of the United States, the Louisiana Purchase, the Alaska Purchase, really driven the government and given it its money up until 1913, when the IRS was implemented here in the United States, and those, pesky federal taxes. But what I'm seeing is the government needs money. You're going to see increased inspection. You're going to see increased enforcement, fines and penalties, enforcement of duties. We talked about the de minimis, the Section 321. There's a bill that's going through Congress, the Competes Act, which is going to change how we trade with China dramatically, because those Section 321 entries, those de minimis entries under $800 that don't have duty applied, are going to be removed from China. So you're going to see a lot of onshoring. And that's really what this agreement was driven to do, is to create that onshoring. We need, as companies, to be more sophisticated with our international trade. And we have to understand the trade agreements and really make them work for us as small to medium-sized companies. Onshoring is one of them. The Section 321 duties hit, and everybody said, hey, we're gonna make the US, the US consumer is gonna pay for that. What we really saw in the industry was an increase in Section 321 entries from China. So no duty being paid at all on those products. A lot of onshoring of manufacturing. I help companies move production from China to other countries where a different trade agreements applied. So they had a 12% duty on their product. It was increased to an additional 20% under the 301 duties. And we moved it to a country where there was a trade agreement with, and they now pay 0% duty. All the manufacturing was moved from China. So the reality is we really need to build predictability into our supply chain. That's what this pandemic has taught us. So really what I'm seeing is that onshoring, we're going to move further away from China and dependency on China as a country here in the United States. And we're going to move back into that more trilateral agreement here with Mexico, Canada, and the US. And that's really kind of the trend I'm seeing. And hopefully, we're going to be much stronger for it in North America because of that onshoring and what we're doing with our supply chains.
Any other further questions for Damon or Nigel? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Craig, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate it. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Damon, for the presentation together and walking us through. It was incredibly informative. I hope people pull a lot out of it. Thanks to Nigel and Linda and the Canada's Trade Commissioner Service and the Consulate General in New York for your partnership and support here. We appreciate you working with us and love doing these programs with you. And like you said, Nigel, hopefully the next one will be in person. Thanks to Don, Niagara Industrial Association. Thanks to our sponsors, the Canada's Trade Commissioner Service and Welke Customs Brokers USA. Thanks to everybody for being here. Obviously, any additional questions, you contact Ashika and me. You can reach out to Damon directly. The consulate is always a great resource. Anybody you call can get you to the right person that you need to talk to. So special thanks to Ashika for manning the tech here. I know that's always kind of a pain sometimes to organize everything, but she does a great job with it. And with that, 10:59 like we promised. I hope you have a great day.